skills, work training, the rapid changes that COVID is likely to bring to the workplace. Related to that, I think, again, a big question about how we tackle poverty, inequality and health within Wales. What are your responses towards maximising direct tax income, the redistribution of wealth to poorer communities, council tax reduction scheme, discretionary assistance fund? So one area COVID, one area taxation. And I would like Sian to address this first, please. 2 minutes.
Yes, okay, well, indeed, we need to be planning, especially for the injustices and inequalities that are going to be facing our society, and those that have actually been highlighted through the pandemic, and the two areas you're talking about, the youth, and we need to be concentrating on jobs for our young people. That's why Plaid Cymru is committed to a youth job guarantee, so that every young person is either guaranteed a place in education, training, or indeed a job, and employers would be part and parcel of all of that, and we would reimburse them obviously for taking on young people into jobs. In terms of taxation and in tackling poverty and inequality, the council tax reduction scheme and the discretionary payments, it does actually show what is possible under devolved powers. And of course, I would like to see more devolution of welfare, so that we can start to create our own welfare system, a compassionate system that protects Welsh citizens from the worst effects of the policies of successive UK governments. I think if we just started with the devolution of the administration of welfare, we could start to get rid of some of the worst successes that we've seen coming through from the UK Parliament. But fundamentally, the abolition of poverty and inequality has to be a core national mission, and we have to have targets. We have to go back to plans and targets, and unfortunately those have been dropped by Welsh Government.
Okay, well, Welsh Government will have a chance to answer in a moment, but Mia first.
I think the focus on young people post COVID-19 as part of the recovery is absolutely crucial, and that's why the Welsh Conservatives would introduce a second chance fund and also extend the range of subjects that degree apprenticeships can be done in, which would increase the skill set of people and allow them to work on the job whilst they are training, which is such an important element of the apprenticeship system, but to be able to do so at a higher level. And we would also make them wider in regards, at the moment they're in very male dominated sectors, and we think it's really important that young women also have the chance in degree apprenticeships. Just to touch on what the second chance fund is, it would be open for anyone, so regardless of age, and that would be anyone who didn't get a level 3 qualification, so that's an A-level or vocational equivalent. They would be able to retrain and do that for free at any point if they wanted to, and that would help sort of stimulate and help people gain qualifications in employment. We have committed to creating 65,000 new jobs in Wales, and what's really important is that this is underpinned of them being skilled and well-paid jobs. I think that's really important and shouldn't be lost within this discussion. It can't just be a job, it needs to be a skilled and well-paid job that has opportunities going forwards. In regards to tax, we are a low tax party. As Conservatives, we believe that low tax stimulates the economy and brings money in. We would freeze council tax for 2 years, and we feel that the Welsh Government hadn't made the great amount of use that they could of the land transaction tax, which is our equivalent of stamp duty. I think it's really important important that we use the tax system that we can to really stimulate the Welsh economy and move it forward as it be. And actually, we agree with Sian in regards to targets. Any government needs to be held accountable for its decisions and what it says it will deliver. And in regards to targets on poverty, unfortunately, the Welsh government have missed theirs on fuel poverty. And it's really important that we set targets and we meet them. And if we don't meet them, we don't just get rid of the target. We set a new target and hold ourselves accountable for delivering on that. Thank you.
Right then, Jeremy, over to you.
Well, just on the Mayor's last point, just a reminder that the UK government's funding to the Welsh Government is in real terms worth less now than it was in 2010. So I agree with all the laudable points that Mayor was making there about progressive use of funding, but it does rather require a Conservative government in Westminster which is committed to progressive policies, which we don't have. But on the points of the question, it's absolutely clear that there is an obligation to make sure that young people do not carry the burden of COVID with them throughout their working lives or throughout the rest of their lives. Our Young Persons Guarantee will ensure that anybody under the age of 25 will receive an offer of work through Jobs Growth Wales or an apprenticeship, including a degree apprenticeship, or support for training or education or to start their own business. And just to reassure Mia as well that 60% of the 100,000 apprenticeships created in the last Senedd term were taken up by women and young women. So actually, they've been a significant contributor to solving one of the other challenges, which is that women in particular and young people have both been overrepresented in sectors which have been in lockdown and so have carried that burden more perhaps in other parts of the community. I just want to say about the particular experience of Black, Asian, minority ethnic communities coming through COVID as well, just to remind everybody with the work of Emmanuel and Bona in particular around the socioeconomic factors underlying some of the challenges that members of Black, Asian, minority ethnic communities have suffered. And I think there's a job of work to be done to implement the recommendations in his, I think, very hard-hitting report. And I think that's a government challenge, but also a challenge for all of us. But also in our manifesto, there's a commitment to paying the real living wage in the social care sector, which we've seen really under strain in the last year, as well as also tackling pay gaps where they're based on discrimination in the context of protected characteristics and bringing in inequalities legal service in order to support that, and also creating jobs as a consequence of an expansion of our house building programme. On the question of taxation, I think we've been able to do a lot through the council tax reduction scheme and contributing further funds to the DAF, which has been a very modest, if you like, tool at the hands of the Welsh Government to help people in particular distressed during COVID. I myself agree with the point that Sian made about the devolution of administration of welfare. I do think that's absolutely worth exploring. But I would also say in the broad picture in relation to income tax, we have said, my personal position in the past has been that government should be bold in using those powers, but I absolutely do think that in the context of the economic pressures of COVID, we need to make a commitment to people that we wouldn't be taking money away, during that period whilst the economy is recovering.
Right, thank you. Oh, you're all so good at doing this Zoom etiquette. And here's Mia, who's been raised her hand because she's going to come back at something I think that you said, Jeremy.
I just wanted to qualify that my point on apprenticeships was in relation to degree apprenticeships and it being much lower for women on degree apprenticeships and women having the opportunity to access those higher level apprenticeships. Right. And absolutely agree with Jeremy on regards to other level apprenticeships. It's fantastic that young women have taken those up. Thank you.
Right, let's see if we can manage sort of another minute or so. Just a quick response on a couple of other areas in relation to poverty. One is about the response to the needs and involvement of disabled people in Wales and more generally reference to the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability. Another question is about how do we include people living in poverty in the decision-making process more effectively? And as a rider to that, a particular question to Mia, whatever happened to David Cameron's Big Society? So then, Sian, if we can keep it crisp, because then we can move on to the next topic.
Yes. Disabled people have been affected disproportionately by the pandemic, and it's definitely one of the groups that need that particular specific focus in our recovery plans going forward. And as Jeremy has pointed out, you know, the Black and minority ethnic group is another specific group that needs that focus. And so across government, we need to be thinking about these specific groups that are being affected, and it's not the work of just one department or one section of government. It has to be an intergovernmental approach, and my worry is that we tend to see Welsh governments thinking in silos, and we need to move away from that kind of approach, and dealing with COVID recovery gives us that opportunity, and to really use the Future Generations Act to give that intergovernmental approach to tackling inequalities wherever they happen. And in terms of trying to involve people in a better way, I think we should be thinking of, you know, people's assemblies and that kind of approach, that where we do actually try and get across cutting or that the approach that brings all sections of community into the discussion, because there are large sections who are not around the table at the moment, and they should be there.
Right, thank you. Mia.
In regards to disabled people being included better in the policy process, I would agree with that point. I found in my own personal experience, if people think it's directly related, like health, for example, they will speak to disability groups. But if it's on something like active travel, for example, maybe people won't have thought. Now, I'm not saying that that's sort of blanket across all, but I think there needs to be more of a, right, we need to make sure that we listen to these people. We need to make sure that we bring these groups in. And it's important as well that we don't just speak to groups that represent people, for example, with disabilities or those in poverty, but we also speak to those with lived experience. And I've been really lucky to in the past been at fantastic focus groups which have involved that and shown that it does work and it does lead to really positive policy development. Was as a policy person, the way I look at things is not as good, if I'm completely honest, as someone who has physically experienced whatever it may be. So yes, absolutely with that one. The big society was not a new concept. David Cameron absolutely did not invent it. He was the one that gave it that title and the one that talked about it. And I think that COVID-19 has really shown what big society has the potential to be. The way that communities have rallied together over the last year has just been absolutely outstanding and has been the very best of our communities and society. If you want to call it, you know, a great example of what big society could be, then absolutely that's for me, that's it in a nutshell.
Okay, in a nutshell. Over to you, Jeremy. What's your response?
I just want to agree with the point that Mia made about lived experience. I think that is essential. And on the point about including people with lived experience of poverty, I couldn't agree more. I think that implementing the socioeconomic equality, public sector equality duty will, I think, create a framing around that for government, which will require more, even more of that, if I can put it in those terms. On the rights of disabled people and what more we can do in that area, our party is committed to the incorporation of the UN Convention on the Rights of Disabled People into Welsh law if we're brought back into government. And I think that will also have a catalytic effect throughout public services and public bodies, which will obviously create duties, but I think, you know, perhaps in a more profound sense, create a culture change as well, which is obviously what we all need and want to see, I'm sure. On the last point about Sian's point about silos, I think it's a genuinely complex question, really. I absolutely agree that government operating in silos is a bad thing. And yet on the other side of the coin, when the obligation to tackle poverty was spread amongst all portfolios in government so that it wasn't effectively siloed, we were equally criticised for doing that. So I think that just, illuminates how challenging some of these questions are about how you organise government to deliver particular outcomes. But the fundamental point is to have a very clear policy focus and have all portfolios focused and trained on delivering that.